The moment my mother-in-law picked up my cocktail napkin, held it at arm's length like it was contaminated, and laughed, I knew this gala would be the worst yet. But I couldn't have predicted just how badly the evening would destroy what little remained of my marriage. "Try not to look so hungry, dear," Victoria Sterlington whispered aloud, her voice dripping with amusement. She passed her empty champagne flute to her husband, Archibald, like it was a burden she was sharing. "The buffet is for the donors, not the dependents." How adorable. Elena is still playing dress-up. I sat at the far end of the overflow table at the Aurora Charity Gala, the most expensive event in the city. This wasn't my celebration. This was a coronation night for Richard's father, Archibald, and the board of directors he was trying to impress. I was here because wives were expected to show up, smile, and stay quiet. I had become very good at staying quiet. "Elena, sweetie," Victoria said, leaning forward with false concern. Her rented diamond choker caught the light. Everything about Victoria caught the light. She made sure of it. "Don't you think it's time to get serious about your contribution? You've been between opportunities for what? 3 years now." 5 years, I corrected softly. My hands were folded in my lap, fingers twisted together so tightly my knuckles hurt. Archibald cleared his throat loudly. He was a portly man who took up space deliberately, his voice always a little too loud, his laugh always demanding attention. "Richard, I apologize for this awkward topic. We don't usually discuss Elena's unemployment at charity dinners. It's somewhat embarrassing, honestly." My husband, Richard, sat beside me, silent. He had been silent for 3 years. The chairman of the gala shifted uncomfortably in his seat nearby. He was dignified in an understated way, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. His gray hair was pulled back neatly, and he barely touched his wine. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I don't think," the chairman began carefully, "that we should—" "Oh, don't worry about offending her," Victoria interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Elena knows we love her. We just want what's best for her. Right, honey?" She looked at Richard expectantly. Richard nodded. He always nodded. He cut his filet mignon into precise pieces and said nothing. "The thing is," Archibald continued, clearly warming to his topic, "we've been very patient, very supportive, but at some point, you have to face reality. Elena, you're 34 years old. Richard has a real career at the firm. You're living in his penthouse, using his money to fund these little sabbaticals. It's time to grow up." The words hit me like slaps. Each one landed precisely where it would hurt most. The terrible thing was that I had heard variations of this speech so many times that I should have been numb to it, but I wasn't. "It hurts every single time." "She's not using my money," Richard said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this time he would defend me. Maybe after 3 years of silence, he would finally speak up. "She has her own savings account," Richard continued, then added, "though I'm not sure how much is actually left in it." The hope died. Of course it did. Victoria laughed high and bright. "Well, that's something at least. Tell me, Elena, what exactly do you do all day? Is it like one of those volunteer things? Do you walk dogs?" My jaw tightened. I had explained my investment strategy to these people at least 20 times. They never listened. They never wanted to know. Knowing would mean acknowledging that I was building something real, and they had decided long ago that I was incapable of that. "I manage a private equity portfolio," I said, keeping my voice level, specifically for medical infrastructure. "We fund hospital wings from—" "Oh, stocks," Archibald interrupted. Right. Very risky. Everyone wants to play the market these days, but the economy is so volatile, don't you think?" Chapter 1. The flashbulbs erupted like synchronized lightning as the valet opened the door of the rented limousine. Victoria Sterlington emerged first, smoothing her sequin gown with the practiced grace of a woman who believed the world was waiting for her arrival. Archibald followed, buttons straining against his midsection, beaming at the paparazzi who were mostly there for the actual celebrities behind us. Richard stepped out next, adjusting his cuffs, his eyes darting nervously toward his mother for approval. I was the last to exit, my midnight blue silk brushing against the pavement. Before I could even find my footing, Victoria had already orchestrated the tableau. She looped one arm through Archibald's and the other through Richard's, effectively creating a wall of Sterlington dominance. "Just the family for this one, darling," Victoria called out over her shoulder, her voice sugary sweet but sharp enough to cut glass. She gestured vaguely for me to step aside, toward the shadows where the handlers and assistants hovered. "We need a clean shot for the society pages. You understand." I understood perfectly. I stepped back, watching them pose, a desperate trinity of fading aristocracy clinging to relevance. Richard didn't even look at me. He just offered his camera-ready smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes anymore. It was almost comical. 5 years ago, I had sold my software logistics firm, Logitech, for a sum that would have made Archibald swallow his tongue. I hadn't retired. I had a vault. I reinvested 90% of the buyout into a diversified portfolio that included biotech, green energy, and, ironically, real estate. To Richard, I was a housewife who dabbled in stocks on her laptop while he went to his real job as a junior partner. He never asked about the specifics, and I stopped offering them when I realized he preferred being the provider, even if he was providing with a credit card that was nearly maxed out. My gaze drifted to Victoria's neck. The diamond choker was stunning, undeniably. It was also from Luxborough, a high-end rental service I happened to hold a 15% stake in. I knew exactly how much the insurance deposit cost because I had approved the quarterly pricing strategy last week. She was wearing a leash around her neck and looking down on me for wearing a dress I owned outright. But the irony ran deeper than jewelry. As the photographer shouted for one more smile, Archibald stamped his foot impatiently on the marble steps of the Sovereign Grand Hotel. "Dreadful upkeep," he muttered between gritted teeth, still smiling for the cameras. "The management here has really let the facade slip." I stifled a laugh. He had no idea. I had purchased the Sovereign Grand through a shell corporation 18 months ago. The dreadful upkeep he was complaining about was a planned restoration of the original 1920s stonework, a project I had personally greenlit to preserve the city's architectural heritage. They were guests in my house, treating me like the help. I smoothed my own dress, watched my husband let his mother adjust his tie, and walked up the stairs of my building, unnoticed and underestimated. Just the way I liked it. Chapter 2. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and forced laughter, a minefield of social obligations that the Sterlingtons navigated with aggressive enthusiasm. We hadn't taken 3 steps onto the parquet floor before Archibald zeroed in on a tall, silver-haired man holding court near the ice sculpture. "Arthur!" Archibald bellowed, towing the rest of us along like decorative barges. "You remember my boy, Richard." Arthur Pendleton, the managing partner of Richard's firm and the man who effectively owned my husband's career, turned with the slow deliberation of a shark. "Richard, good to see you." His gaze slid to me, cool and assessing. "And this must be the better half." "This is Elena," Richard said, his voice tight. He didn't reach for my hand. "Our lovely homemaker," Victoria interjected smoothly, resting a hand on my shoulder as if to physically keep me in my place. "Elena creates such a peaceful environment for Richard to decompress from the rigors of actual work. We keep telling her she should find a little project, but she seems quite content with her leisure." The word leisure was delivered like a slur. I kept my smile frozen, a mask of polite vacuity. Pendleton raised an eyebrow, a flicker of boredom crossing his face. He clearly had no interest in discussing domesticity. "Is that so? Well, Richard needs the peace. The market has been brutal this quarter. We're still trying to forecast the fallout from the Federal Reserve's latest pivot on interest rate swaps." He swirled his drink, looking between us. "It's creating a fascinating squeeze on the bond yields. I suppose you don't worry about such things in the domestic sphere, Mrs. Sterlington?" I opened my mouth, ready to engage, but Victoria beat me to it with a tittering, suffocating laugh. "Oh, Arthur, please. Don't tax her pretty little head with macroeconomics. Elena is more concerned with, well, I'm sure she has hobbies. Knitting, perhaps? Or is it sourdough this year? The condescension was physical. A heavy blanket tried to smother me. Richard looked at his shoes, terrified that his boss might think he had married Simpleton. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through Victoria's giggle. It wasn't loud, but it had the distinct, crisp cadence of a boardroom address. The squeeze isn't coming from the swaps themselves, Mr. Pendleton. It's the liquidity crunch in the repo markets. The institutional leverage is too high. Once the quarterly rebalancing finishes next week, the bond yields will invert again. It's a classic bull trap. Silence stretched between us, taut and sudden. The ambient noise of the gala seemed to drop away. Pendleton blinked, his glass freezing halfway to his mouth. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, the boredom vanishing instantly. That is, Pendleton started, his eyes narrowing in calculation. That is a remarkably specific analysis, an entirely counterintuitive, and entirely accurate, I added, holding his gaze. For a second, I saw respect kindle in his eyes. He opened his mouth to ask another question, perhaps to ask where I'd seen the repo data that wasn't public yet, but Archibald clapped a heavy, sweating hand on Pendleton's back. She watches a lot of cable news while she's dusting. Archibald boomed, laughing nervously, his face flushing a deeper shade of gin red. Parrots whatever the talking heads say. Amazing memory, though, like a circus seal. Right, Richard muttered, finally looking up with a sheen of panic on his forehead. She, reads my briefs sometimes. Just repeating what she sees. A lucky guess. Pendleton's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, thoughtful and probing, before he let Archibald steer him toward the bar. Don't do that, Victoria hissed in my ear, her nails digging into my arm as the men walked away. Nobody likes a show-off, Elena, especially when you're just guessing. It makes you look desperate. Chapter 3. The lights dimmed, shifting focus to the podium where a tuxedoed auctioneer began the rhythmic chant of high society extortion. It was a spectator sport, really, a way for the wealthy to purchase public adoration in tax-deductible installments. Archibald wasted no time in making his move. When a vintage Magnum of 1982 Bordeaux came up, he raised his paddle with the flourish of a conductor silencing an orchestra. 5,000, he boomed, ensuring his voice carried to the surrounding tables. It was a paltry sum compared to the heavy hitters in the room, but Archibald sold it like he was funding a cure for malaria single-handedly. When the gavel fell in his favor, he leaned back, preening under the polite, scattered applause. Victoria patted his arm, beaming with a pride that seemed entirely disproportionate to the purchase of fermented grapes. Your turn, Richard, Archibald said, nudging my husband's shoulder roughly. The next item was a set of diamond cufflinks, starting at 3,000. The firm needs to see the Sterlington name on the board. Show them you're a player. Richard shrank into his collar, his face paling. He took a long sip of his drink, avoiding his father's expectant gaze. I can't this quarter, Dad. Things are a bit tight right now. The air at the table curdled instantly. Victoria's smile inverted into a tight, disappointed line. She turned her head slowly, her eyes landing on me like dual-targeting lasers. Tight? Oh, Richard. I told you that maintaining a two-person household in the city was ambitious, especially with only one income. She sighed, a tragic sound meant to elicit sympathy from a salad fork. It's the silent expenses that bleed you dry, isn't it? The gym memberships, the online shopping, the leisure costs. I stared at her, thinking of the spreadsheet I managed for our household expenses, which Richard barely contributed to. I hadn't bought a new handbag in 2 years. My leisure cost was a Netflix subscription. We're managing, Richard mumbled, not correcting her. He never corrected her. Well, it's a shame, Archibald grunted, turning his back on us. Takes money to make money, son. You can't look like a pauper in a room full of kings. I looked down at my phone, resting discreetly in my lap. The auctioneer was announcing the next lot, a week-long private charter in the Maldives, including a staffed yacht. Opening bid, $40,000. While Victoria lectured Richard on the virtue of thrift, specifically my thrift, I logged into the gala's bidding app. I had been eyeing this lot for weeks. The proceeds went directly to the pediatric oncology wing, the specific project my firm was backing. $45,000 to the gentleman in the front, the auctioneer shouted. $50,000, I tapped into the interface. $50,000 to bidder number 427, the auctioneer bellowed, scanning the room for a raise paddle. There was none, just a digital confirmation. Going once, going twice. Sold. To our mobile bidder. A ripple of impressed murmurs went through the crowd. $50,000 dropped in silence. Good Lord, Victoria scoffed, shaking her head at the screen displaying the winning bid amount. Some people simply have more money than sense. Probably some tech tycoon showing off from the bathroom. Vulgar, Archibald agreed, clutching his $5,000 wine invoice like a shield. I took a sip of my water, locking my phone screen. Yes, I said softly, watching the digital confetti rain down on my display. Very vulgar. Chapter 4. The transition to the dining hall was a military operation of social stratification. Victoria stood at the precipice of the gilded circle, the cluster of tables nearest the stage, directing the family like a traffic cop for the elite. Richard, darling, you're next to the senator, she cooed, guiding my husband toward table 1. Archibald and I are flanking the chairman. Then she turned to me, her smile tight and dismissive. Elena, there was a slight calculation error with the head table's capacity. We put you at table 47. It's the young professionals table. We thought you'd have more in common with people still finding their footing. Table 47 was in the Siberian hinterlands of the ballroom, wedged between the swinging kitchen doors and the emergency exit. It was the overflow table, populated by unpaid interns and junior staff who were just happy to be fed. I didn't argue. I didn't blink. I simply walked away from the heavy centerpieces of the main table and sat down in exile. I was wondering when you'd escape the lion's den. A deep voice rumbled to my left. I turned to see Dr. Eris Thorne, the hospital director and the man whose vision I had been secretly funding for half a decade. He looked out of place among the terrifyingly young interns, his salt and pepper beard and weary eyes marking him as a veteran of deeper battles. Dr. Thorne, I smiled, a genuine expression for the first time that night. I didn't expect to find the guest of honor sitting by the kitchen. He raised his glass of water in a mock toast. I prefer the company back here. The air at the head table is a bit thin for my taste. Besides, I wanted to thank our shadow benefactor personally before the circus starts. He lowered his voice, his eyes twinkling with a secret we shared. The blueprints for the new wing are approved. The pediatric isolation units are exactly as you specified. It's going to save thousands, Elena. It's going to save thousands, Mrs. Vance. He corrected himself, using my professional name, a mark of respect the Sterlingtons had never granted me. I'm just glad the funds cleared, I said quietly. Cleared? You changed the trajectory of this hospital overnight. He shook his head, glancing toward the front of the room. Your in-laws are up there preening like peacocks, and the woman who actually built the nest is sitting next to the busing station. It's absurd. My phone buzzed against the tablecloth. I glanced down. A text from Richard. Mom is just stressed about the seating chart. Please don't make a scene. It's better this way. You won't be bored by the speeches. I looked up at table 1. I could see the back of Richard's head. He was nodding at something his mother was saying, safe in the inner circle, oblivious to the fact that the only reason the gala was happening at all was because his unemployed wife had signed a check an hour ago. Don't worry, Richard, I whispered to the screen, sliding the phone face down. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm going to make history. Chapter 5. The chandeliers dimmed to a hushed, golden twilight, signaling the end of the entree service and the beginning of the real show. Chairman Harrison stepped to the podium, gripping the edges as if to steady himself against the weight of the news he carried. The room, sensing the shift in gravity, fell silent. Even the clinking of silverware at the overflow table ceased. Friends, benefactors, Harrison began, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous hall. Tonight was projected to be a somber appeal. We faced a deficit that threatened to close our pediatric research initiative before it began. He paused, looking out over the sea of tuxedos and gowns. But the wind has changed. Just moments before dinner was served, the foundation received a transfer. A single, unrestricted gift that secures not only the building project, but the operational cost for the next decade. A murmur rippled through the crowd, breathless and electric. "Tonight, we celebrate a miracle gift," Harrison said, his voice thickening. $20 million. The gasp was collective, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Then the applause broke like thunder, frantic, competitive applause from people who desperately wanted to be associated with that level of capital. I watched the Sterlingtons from my exile at table 47. They were practically vibrating. To them, money was a blood sport, and someone had just won the championship. 20 million, Archibald announced to the table at large, leaning back with a proprietary air. That's legacy capital. Has to be the Vanderbilts. Anderson told me on the links last week he was looking to offload some liquidity. Don't be pedestrian, Archibald. Victoria scoffed, though her voice was pitched high to ensure the surrounding tables heard her. She fanned herself with her program. The Vanderbilts are too flashy. This has the quiet elegance of the Rothschilds. Or perhaps the Savoy family. I ran into Eloise Savoy at the club just yesterday. She had that look about her. Mrs. Gable, the city's most vicious society columnist, leaned over from the adjacent table, her eyes glittering. "You seem quite certain, Victoria. Do you have inside information?" Victoria didn't miss a beat. She leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to make it seem conspiratorial, while remaining perfectly audible to the 12 people nearest her. "Well, I shouldn't speak out of turn, darling. Discretion is the better part of valor in our circle. But let's just say we personally know the donor. We move in the same intimate spheres, of course. It's exactly the kind of noble gesture our sort of people make." "Is that so?" Mrs. Gable raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Fascinating." I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my chest. Victoria was staking her entire social standing on a lie, claiming intimacy with the very person she had spent 3 years treating like a parasite. She claimed to know the donor while seating her at the children's table. Richard sat beside her, staring at his wine glass. He knew they were lying. He knew they didn't know a soul with $20 million to spare. But he stayed silent, letting his mother weave the noose that would hang them all. Chapter 6. Chairman Harrison adjusted his reading glasses, holding a heavy cream-colored card with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. "The identity of our benefactor has been a closely guarded secret," he announced, his voice booming through the hall. "But tonight, she has agreed to step into the light. Her story is one of extraordinary vision." I took a sip of water, watching the condensation bead on the glass. The air at the overflow table felt thin, charged with static. "She is a self-made pioneer in the technology sector," Harrison continued. "A woman who revolutionized logistics software before pivoting to become a quiet, yet formidable force in global equity markets." At the main table, Victoria was nodding sagely, as if she had personally vetted this mystery woman's portfolio. "Tech," she whispered loud enough to be heard 3 tables away. "I knew it. It's likely Abigail Johnson or perhaps Cheryl. I've always said we needed more women in power." "She's a philanthropist who believes in impact over applause," Harrison read, looking up to scan the room. "A woman who values silence over status, and who has built an empire while remaining virtually invisible to the public eye." Richard, who had been staring blankly at his dessert, suddenly frowned. He turned his head slowly, looking at me across the distance between the head table and the hinterlands. His brow furrowed, a flicker of synapse firing behind his eyes. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the room. It wasn't a question directed at me, really, but a sudden, confused thought spoken aloud. Didn't you study tech? Before the stocks." I met his gaze, my face impassive. "I founded a logistics firm, Richard. Logitech." He blinked, the gears turning rustily. "Right? Logistics. Like the software Harrison just mentioned." Victoria let out a short, barking laugh that caused the senator next to her to jump. "Oh, Richard, honestly," she scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard it looked painful. So did the IT repairman who fixed the Wi-Fi last week. Studying tech hardly puts one in the category of a $20 million donor. But Richard started, looking from me to the chairman. "Be serious, darling," she hissed, patting his hand with condescending force. "Elena barely manages her own checking account. Do you really think she's secretly running a global empire from the guest bedroom? It's a coincidence. Stop embarrassing yourself." Archibald grunted his agreement, tearing into a bread roll. "Focus, boy. They're about to announce the name. You want to be ready to clap. This is the kind of person we need to invite to the summer house." I watched them, these people who claim to be the arbiters of taste and success. They were listening to my biography, hearing the specific details of my life, details I had tried to share with them for years, and dismissing them as impossible because the package didn't match their expectations. They were looking for a peacock, unable to recognize the lioness sitting right behind them. "And now," Harrison said, smiling broadly, "it is my distinct honor to introduce her." I placed my napkin on the table. It was time. Chapter 7. Please welcome the chairwoman of Vance Capital, Elena Vance. The name hung in the air, disjointed from reality for everyone at Table 1. Richard looked around wildly, craning his neck as if expecting another, more impressive Elena Vance to materialize from the ceiling. "Vance?" Victoria whispered, her voice shrill enough to carry over the low hum of the room. "There must be a mistake. It's a clerical error. Vance is a common name." Then the spotlight swung. A beam of pure white light cut through the gloom of the ballroom, bypassing the diamonds and tuxedos at the front and landing squarely on the mismatched cutlery of Table 47. It blinded me for a second, turning the shocked faces of the interns beside me into ghosts. I stood up. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It was the sound of 300 socialites simultaneously realizing they had miscalculated. I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue gown, picked up my clutch, and began the long walk toward the stage. To get there, I had to pass the gilded circle. As I neared Table 1, Victoria shot out of her chair. She looked manic, her face a mask of panicked fury. She lunged forward, blocking my path, her fingers digging into my bicep with painful force to halt my stride. "Sit down, you fool," she hissed, her eyes darting frantically around the room to see who was watching, unable to comprehend that the light was meant for me. "They're pointing at someone behind you. Don't humiliate us by trying to claim credit for her." I looked down at her hand on my arm, watching her knuckles turn white, then looked up at her face. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't see a matriarch. I saw a terrified, petty woman wearing a rented necklace. I didn't speak. I simply ripped my arm from her grasp with a sharp, violent motion that broke her hold and sent her stumbling back against Archibald's chair. Richard half rose, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at me, at the gown I owned, at the posture I had hidden, at the stranger he had married. "Elena," he choked out, the color draining from his face. I ignored him. I ignored Victoria's gasp of outrage. I stepped around them, my heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor like a countdown. Every step was a shed layer of their expectations. I walked past the doubters, the gossip columnists, and the hushed elites, ascending the stairs to the podium where the chairman waited with an outstretched hand. I took the microphone, turned to face the room, and let the deafening silence wash over me. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Chapter 8. I gripped the podium, the cool metal grounding me against the blinding glare of the stage lights. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a heavy, waiting thing. I looked out at the faces that had previously looked through me, the socialites, the captains of industry, and right in the front row, the family that had spent 3 years treating me like an embarrassing footnote. "Thank you, Chairman Harrison." I began, my voice steady, amplified to fill every corner of the room that had tried to shrink me. "Tonight, we talk about value. In this room, value is often measured in titles, in lineage, in the loudness of one's presence. We celebrate the captains of industry and the pillars of society. But often, The work that truly sustains us, the work that heals, that builds, that saves lives, happens quietly. I paused, letting the words settle. I saw Dr. Thorne at the back of the room raise a glass to me, a silent salute from the overflow table. For the past 5 years, I have been dismissed by some as between opportunities. I continued, allowing a small, dry smile to touch my lips. I've been told that I need to get serious about my contribution. But while others were busy polishing their reputations and buying rented validation, my firm was quietly funding the infrastructure that will save this city's children. My gaze drifted down to table 1. Victoria was pale beneath her layers of makeup, her hand clutching her throat. Archibald looked as though he had swallowed a lemon. Richard simply stared at me, his expression a hollow mix of awe and terror. I locked eyes with my mother-in-law. "There is a misconception among the elite," I said, my voice dropping an octave, commanding the room's total attention. "Some assume that silence is emptiness. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone working while others are talking." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. The insult she had hurled at me 1,000 times was now a weapon, turned back on her with devastating precision. "This donation is not a bid for status," I said, shifting my focus back to the wider audience. "It is a promise to the future, and promises should be kept by those who understand the value of labor." I know there has been much speculation about the naming rights for the new wing. I know there were hopes that it might carry a name associated with traditional influence. I saw Archibald straighten slightly, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. He had spent months lobbying the board, promising favors he couldn't deliver, hoping to slap the Sterlington brand on a building he couldn't afford to paint. "However," I said firmly, crushing that hope, "I have decided to name the facility the Margaret Vance Memorial Wing, after my grandmother. She didn't have a coat of arms or a summer estate. She was a janitor in this very hospital for 40 years. She scrubbed these floors so that her granddaughter could one day stand on this stage and sign the checks. That is the kind of legacy that deserves to be etched in stone." The applause that erupted wasn't the polite, gloved clapping of earlier. It was raucous, genuine, and thunderous. I didn't look back at the Sterlingtons. I didn't need to. They were already ghosts, fading into the background of my story. Chapter 9. The applause followed me down the stairs like a physical wave, washing away the last 3 years of silence. The room was on its feet. Men who had previously looked through me were now craning their necks to catch my eye. Women who had mocked my leisure were applauding with frantic enthusiasm. I reached the bottom step, breathing in the cool, rarefied air of absolute vindication. Before I could take another step, Richard was there. He broke through the crowd, his face flushed with a manic, desperate relief. He looked like a man who had just discovered a winning lottery ticket in the pocket of a coat he was about to throw away. "Elena, darling." He reached for me, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to pull me into a celebratory embrace. He beamed at the cameras flashing nearby, posing for the proud husband shot he hadn't earned. "My God, why didn't you tell me? 20 million? This changes everything." Mom is in shock, but she's thrilled. "We have so much to plan." I stopped. I didn't step back. I just stood so still that he faltered, his hands hovering awkwardly in the air between us. "We don't have anything to plan, Richard," I said. My voice was low, intimate, meant only for him. "What? Don't be silly. The press is going to eat this up. The Sterlington name is insolvent," I interrupted. His smile fractured. "What?" I reached for my left hand. With a slow, deliberate movement, I slid the diamond solitaire off my finger. It was a modest ring, a family heirloom Victoria had allowed me to wear only after making me sign an insurance waiver. I pressed the cold metal into Richard's palm and closed his fingers over it. "You should sell this," I said calmly. "It won't cover everything, but it might help with the second mortgage your father took out on the estate last month, or the gambling debts your mother has been hiding in the charity ledger." Richard's face went slack, the color draining away until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the gala lights. You knew. I'm an investor, Richard. Due diligence is my job. I've known for 2 years. I stepped closer, my voice soft as a blade. I didn't expose you because I loved you. I thought you were a victim of their expectations. But tonight, watching you sit there while they stripped me bare, I realized you weren't a victim. You're just a coward. I turned my back on him before he could respond. I walked through the parted crowd, head high, ignoring Victoria's screeching voice calling my name from table 1. Outside, the night air was crisp. The valet was already waiting, holding the door not to the Sterlingtons' aging limousine, but to the sleek, black Phantom I had ordered an hour ago. "Mrs. Vance," the valet said, bowing his head. As I slid into the leather seat, the paparazzi swarmed. They ignored Archibald and Victoria, who had stumbled out onto the steps looking like relics of a bygone era. The cameras were trained solely on me. I didn't smile for them. I didn't wave. I simply signaled the driver. And as the car pulled away, I watched my old life disappear in the rearview mirror, shrinking until it was nothing but a speck of dust.